Hello, this is Derek from One River Tea. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so that last episode actually turned into a review of 2023. I really just focused on some of the untold stories of January, me visiting a Buddhist temple looking for wild tea. I briefly overviewed my spring tea trips and a few other teas that we were looking into last year. Really excited for this year and the Anhua Heicha that we're currently sourcing. But what's really interesting about that is the whole podcast so far has kind of been these slow episodes of talking about different tea regions I visited, and I got all the way, or not even halfway through my April spring tea trip in all of these episodes. So if you look back, I talk about Suzhou, where I went to for the Biluochun in late March. I talk about Hangzhou, that I went to for the Longjing in early April. And then I talk about Chaozhou for the Dansong Oolong, and that was about April 5th. And finally, I just started talking about Yunnan, which I got to like April 12th, April 13th. And so we still need to talk about, my late April time in Yunnan, in Xishuangbanna, and in Linsong. Then go over to Anhui, where I sourced the yellow teas and the guapian. And then in May, I also went to Fuding. Now, there's still a whole lot to talk about in this tea episodes, in this tea podcast, because I'm still going to go on another tea sourcing trip all the time, basically living in China, but really I have all of April just booked off for tea. And so I'm trying to catch up to myself before I get into the next year's sourcing trip. So I have to do a lot of backpedaling here and just kind of blow through these episodes, hopefully. And if you've been following me for a while, I'm not just doing this ad hoc. There's a structure to this. I'm trying to talk about all the different teas I've personally sourced, and to do so I have this compulsion to do it right, which means I have to start all the way back at the beginning with the history of the tea type, the history of the region. Then I do the sourcing tea trip episodes. Then I get in the making of that tea style episodes, and then finally I talk about how to drink it, how to appreciate it. And thus, if you're really into the Biluochun, if you're interested in Biluochun, check that out. The Longjing, the Dragon Well, and of course the Fuding white teas. These are all finished episodes that I've done the history, the sourcing, the making, the enjoying. And this episode right here, I kind of took a break in the last episode talking about 2023 sourcing. What I'm supposed to be doing in these episodes is getting into the sourcing of Pu'er tea, because I previously did the history of Pu'er in an unprecedented 2-part episode, and now I'm into the sourcing episode. So I'm not sure how many sourcing episodes for Pu'er I'll do, because I went around in Pu'er, and I'll probably go around again, but it should be more fun than the other historical episodes, because it's just going to be about the stories, the traveling, the people I met, and the teas I tried. So let's get into it. So following the narrative thread of the last sourcing trip episode, I think I left you guys up on Wudong Mountain, where I was sourcing the Wudong Dansongs with Wenzitong. And yeah, so let's talk about kind of getting off that mountain and getting to Yunnan, because it was really nice hanging out with Wenzitong for so long. And it was kind of sad to part, because he was a younger tea maker and we really kind of got along. And it doesn't happen all the time that I feel really deeply connected with these people. Like, of course, I like and respect them and admire them, but really this is something of like true friendship. And so when we parted, I invited him to visit me in Yangzhou, and he actually ended up doing that just a few months ago in real time now. Real time as in it's January. He visited me in November, I believe. Right around like Black Friday. It was kind of a hard time for him to visit, but it was really nice to see him. Wenzitong. Anyways, he's the one who makes the Wudong Dansong Oolongs. Really prolific guy. And so going back to that point in time, I was up at Wudong Village at the peak of the Wudong Mountain, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the episode, in sourcing Wudong Dansong episode, but it is a nightmare getting off that mountain. Traffic jams, one-lane road. Like there's the mountain has gotten more and more popular, but you can't just create extra space for the lanes. The single road stays the same. And so there'll be like 20 cars that are trying to come up the mountain and then 20 cars trying to go down the mountain. And so one side has to stop and reverse all the way until they can find a place to park on the side of the road and let those 20 cars coming up come through. And so really just general advice, avoid this. Not even the motorcycles, not even the bikes could squeeze through this kind of traffic jam. All the owners of the shops would have to go out to the street and start, directing traffic. So it's kind of a nightmare. But again, one of the unforeseen hazards of sourcing wudang dansong oolong. Anyways, I was up there and I couldn't get a cab to get off the mountain. And so I was thinking like either I'm going to have to hitch a ride or have to walk down the mountain. But luckily, very, very to my fortune, there was this beautiful woman who was buying tea from Wenzatong. They're old friends. She has a tea shop in Chaozhou. She was there with two of her equally very pretty friends, and they were all going back to the Chaozhou that afternoon, and I was able to hitch a ride with them. And so thus fortune found me sharing a ride with these three menu, as you would say in Chinese. And they're all really into tea. We're talking about different designs, different packaging, how we market this, how we sell that. It was a very interesting experience. And I was, a little eager to get out into the old town because I actually had an appointment. Every time I come back to Chaozhou, I try and, meet all the people that I've seen and I've missed because I lived there for just about a year in 2021. And one of the places that I always, every single time go back to is Kemin's Baiyan Jinshe ceramic studio. This is in the old nunnery, and he's created a ceramic studio since like 2015, maybe 2017. Kemin is just this fantastic, like Guangdong provincial level master who's initially studied ceramics, like sculpture, and then got really into hand-pulled pottery, like the teapots, the Chaozhou teapots, and he had a factory with Xiehua. Xiehua is like one of the biggest names. He's a Chinese certified national master in Chinese ceramics and intangible heritage and culture. And Kemin is a really, really wonderful teacher. Like, I really can't express how fortunate I am to have had him as a teacher and to meet all of the apprentices there. And so every time I visit, I always, they let me stay there and throw teapots and study teapots with them. Really, really fortunate for me. And every time I go back, I try and treat them to like dinner. I get a bunch of YMI food, like order out, order in, and we eat it in the studio and drink a little beer and stuff like that. So I was really eager to get back into town because I had that arrangement. Now, I know. The point of this episode is not Chaozhou Ceramics hanging out. That's a secret episode I'll probably release later, I promise, because there's a lot that goes into that. The shenanigans of this like pure British bake-off of like who can make a teapot, the best teapot in under an hour. And everyone's like, there are 5 apprentices versus Kemin, and they're all working, trying to create a great teapot. I have a bunch of footage of that I want to make into a video sometime, but really fun stuff. This is where I got the apple pie teapots. If you guys are following Tao Teaware, you've seen us selling these really, really light, totally handmade, side-handled Chaozhou teapots. This all comes from the apprentices in Kemin's studio. And so it's so cool, like being back there, being able to hand pick these out and get to sell them through, the Tao Teaware company. Also, I visited Zhang Yinchao, and that's where I got those really, really light Zeppelin kettles. Zhang Yinchao is just an incredible guy. I clicked with him in the same way I clicked with Wen Zitong. Zhang Yinchao is like 1 day older than me, and he makes incredible pottery. He actually was a teacher at the ceramics studio in Chaozhou, or ceramics university in Chaozhou, and taught a lot of the apprentices in addition to Kemin. So really cool, small kind of click there. Anyways, I promise to get into these stories in more depth in a later episode. The purpose for this episode is talking about the Pu'er trip. And again, it happens the next day. So I get off the mountain from Chaozhou, from Wudong, get into Chaozhou, have dinner with Kemin, meet up with Zhang Yinchao, and then the next day I immediately get on a plane and go straight to Kunming. So yeah, a little backstory on Kunming. I don't want to get into the whole history, but Chaozhou versus Kunming, they're very different cities. Where Chaozhou is in like the deep south, you get a whole lot of humidity, some really scorching summers and barely any winter. Kunming is referred to the Siji Ruchun, which means four seasons like spring. It's the city of eternal spring. It's really, it lives up to that name as, amazing as it sounds. It's just about 2,000 meters up. If you remember the geography of Yunnan, Kunming is kind of right in the middle of Yunnan between like the high mountains and then the slopes down to the rivers. And so 2,000 meters for Kunming, that's over a mile high, the altitude here. And this creates a really interesting region, which creates a lot of life, a lot of greenery, lotus ponds, really beautiful scenery everywhere throughout Kunming. However, Kunming is an interesting city because it reminds me of the idiom Tiangao Huangyuan. I think I've told you guys this idiom so many times. I use it all the time for Yunnan. The sky is high and the emperor is far away. Kunming in the past had a bit of a rough reputation, like a fair bit of drugs, a lot of counterculture scenes, a lot of beatnik expatriates kind of bumming around the area. In the past few decades, it's definitely cleaned up a little bit, but it's still significantly seedier than my Jiangnan city counterparts. Jiangnan and Jiangsu is the more cultured kind of area, if you will. That said, there's still a lot of really cool stuff happening in Kunming. It's really just like an expat paradise with great weather, really good food, hip bars, a lot of stuff going on, and of course, tea, and more tea. Now, I've been to Kunming a few times, and every time I go, one of my favorite things to do is to check out the tea markets and the local tea cities. In Kunming, there are several different places that stylize themselves as, the tea city, the biggest tea market in China, and stuff like that. And I feel like every time I go to a different one. But the way they're structured, it's kind of like a big block, like an outside mall. So many tiny shops, all selling tea. And sometimes if you're walking through them for a while, you lose track of where you are because everything feels like it's on loop. Because they're kind of just copy and pasted versions of each other. It's really difficult eventually to suss out which one's the tea house I liked from earlier, which one is the new one. Sometimes, though, even though they all look the same, sometimes you can actually get one that is owned by a well-to-do farmer. Somebody that sold enough tea to effectively be able to afford a stall in the city. And thus, every now and then you can find a rare catch that's just a straight line from the city all the way into the mountains. Now, I've never been so lucky in the Kunming tea market to get that lucky catch of finding a farmer that had opened a city shop. What I do enjoy, though, I enjoy walking through them and just seeing the different prices for the different teas. It's really cool to see, knockoff Bingdao sells for this much. And this is another funny thing that I really enjoy is seeing all of the knockoffs. Like, I see Laobanjiang Gushu coins for a quarter. Pure Xigui cakes for a few bucks. I see, the names Bingdao, Laobanjiang, Xigui everywhere. And the last time I went, I actually bought a lot of these samples because, believe it or not, at that time we were running a small monthly tea club with One River Tea. And I had in mind that I really wanted to do this real versus fake. Though at that time I didn't really have any real connections that I trusted. And so I couldn't quite make it viable. And the tea was so bad that I didn't even want to give it away. Like this Laobanjiang coins and this Bingdao cake. It was not good. But I thought it would be cool as an education point to be like, hey, in China, you can buy anything that says anything for really, really cheap. You really just have to know the right price. That way you can kind of expect what you should pay for it. And we'll get into this later with the Xigui and some other teas I'll talk about here in a second. And so the last time I was in one of these tea markets I mentioned was probably 2021 in the summer, I think. That's when I first met Jonah from Bitterleaf Teas. I had just come back from hiking in northern Yunnan, just taking a little vacation there. And it was really nice to sit down, have some tea, talk about, what it's like running a business and stuff. Really cool side note here. I've just been very fortunate to meet these people in the same industry, kind of doing the same thing, living in China, buying and selling teas. the more you get into it, the deeper you get, kind of the fewer the people there are around, and you kind of meet the people you need to meet at the right time. So I've received a lot of great advice from both Jonah, from Bitterleaf, from Paul, from White 2T. And it was actually, I think it was Jonah that turned me on to Xigui and Bang Dong, because I told him I was going to be sourcing Linsang teas, and he was like, oh my God, I love Xigui, but it's way too expensive. Paul was like, man, Xigui used to be so good and so cheap. Now it's super expensive. And I'm kind of worried because they built a highway there now. So it's very easy to get to. And so it's probably just going to get more and more expensive. But I really value this. And what's so cool about this feeling is like there is no competition. There's only working together. There's cooperation. We're all in it for the same thing, sourcing the best teas we can and introducing all of these teas to the West. So really humbled by, these experiences of meeting people that I bought tea from before, and then kind of that fake it till you make it sense, imposter syndrome, where it's like all of a sudden like, oh, I'm one of the guys. Like I'm one of the people doing this now. Anyways, as Tea Soup kind of shows, it's not all a walk in the park. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and we're in the 6th year of doing it. So I really shouldn't be feeling like an imposter now, but if anyone knows, imposter syndrome's a real thing, and like it's really cool to suddenly take a step back and realize, you've made it. So, anyways, let's not get lost here. Let's get back to what I was actually doing this spring, not last year, not the year before. So, I get on a plane from Chaozhou and I get into Kunming late on April 12th. It's really late and I had an early morning train, so I'm looking for a hotel near the train station. And as I mentioned earlier, Kunming is kind of a seedy city, and I found out that one of the seediest parts is right around the train station. So I was walking around there looking for, my hotel, and I very rarely get the feeling of something being, like unsafe in China. China really has this, they call it the Anchuangan, that safety feeling. I was experiencing it a little bit in Kunming around like that train station late at night. And anyways, I would not recommend staying around the train station. I would not book it for people doing a tea trip in Linsong or something like that. I would book a hotel in a nicer part of the city. Anyways, there was a new leg of the high-speed train of the Galatea that was recently completed from Kunming all the way to Linsang. A lot of people were really excited about it. I heard about it a lot of times when I was in Kunming and Yunnan. Because not so long ago, the only way to get to Linsang, the only way to get to Sichuanbana was either through a plane from Kunming or by bus or by car. And so the fact that you could just hop on a train makes it really, really more accessible, really cool. And so I had a morning high-speed train that was just what I needed. It was going to get me into Linsang by 3 p.m., which hopefully would give me enough time to actually do some preliminary sourcing before the sun goes down. And also the 5-hour train ride would give me time to kind of process all the photos from what I just mentioned in the earlier part of this episode, hanging out with Zhang Yinchao, hanging out with Kemen. No time has gone by here. Like, that's why I bring this up. It's literally like 24 hours ago. And so I get into the hotel, I fall asleep pretty quick, get up in the morning, and the best part about mornings in Yunnan is the mishan. Let me really quickly explain. Mishan is the thin rice noodles in a broth, and it's a specialty of the region. I get it every single time for every single morning and when I go to Yunnan. You can get it up north, you can get it down south. And what it is, it seems really simple. It's just noodles and like a broth, maybe a meat broth, a chicken broth, or something like that. But then you take it to this table, and the table has all kinds of fixings on it. It has mint leaves, it has sugar, it has vinegar, it has salt, it has MSG. It has all these different sauces, spices, and stuff like that. And you just get this tiny spoon, you add dollops of this, dollops of that, dollops of this. Really, really lovely. It feels good in the stomach, and I don't know, I'm a convert now. Now all I want is like mishan for breakfast. Another specialty of this region that I almost forgot about until looking at the photos are the bajiao. The bajiao is like a local type of banana that's short and fat and just impossibly satisfying for me. I really don't eat bananas. I kind of detest bananas. I don't like them. But every time I go to Yunnan, these are a substantial part of my diet. That and the mishan. So, as I mentioned, I have a morning train. I'm staying right by the railway station, though. So, in the morning, I have just enough time for a bowl of mi shan and a couple bananas for the train ride. And yeah, I get to the train station and take off. Now, real quick, a tangent on prices for anyone interested. This is something I don't really talk about in tea soup just because I kind of forget. But it is very affordable to travel in China. For instance, the hotel in Kunming by the train station was just over 100 yuan for the night, which is like 14 bucks. Breakfast for the bananas and the bowl of noodles about $3, $4, about 25 yuan. And then for the 5-hour high-speed train ticket all the way to Linsong, that was 255 yuan, which is about 35 bucks. And so this is what I really like about traveling through China and why I can do so much of it, because a lot of these prices are very cheap and affordable. Like that night in Yunnan, my favorite breakfast and a ticket to Linsong, all about 50 bucks. Now, as I mentioned on the train ride, I'm processing a lot of the stuff from, my trip in Chaozhou, the Wudong Mountains. I'm kind of thinking about the teas I bought and the teas I'm wanting to buy. And then all of a sudden I I have this brief moment of panic where I'm thinking like, what am I doing? I have no contacts in Linsong. I've never sourced tea in Yunnan before. I don't know anyone out there. I don't know what it's like out there. I don't know how to get out to the villages. I don't know. I'm not driving my own car. I'm going to have to take the bus. What if I get stranded out there? And all of these doubts and fears kind of well up in me. And, am I being ridiculous thinking I can just take a train to Linsong and find tea? And what's really why I bring this up is it's important to realize like I'm not without my fair share of doubts. I'm an optimistic person, if you can't tell, but I'm also not a foolish one. I'm constantly reflecting, critiquing, challenging my beliefs and my actions. And I think it was Paul that told me one time, like, if you're not questioning what you're doing it wrong. Because it's, not only like about branding, not only about your motive for buying and selling tea or how you're going to do it, it's also just about just kind of general life advice. And so here I am thinking about going into Linsong, just gonna go find some tea. Anyways, I bring this up because it fits right into that imposter syndrome thing. Even though I've done this, dozens of times, I still have that doubt in my mind. But, you got to overcome it, and you got to step into the void sometimes, into the darkness, and your feet find the path, right? And so I get into Linsong around 3 p.m., and I can already see signs of a thicker culture. It's less, Han minority group and more people with like, actual minority dresses, carrying babies in wicker baskets on their backs, fresh produce on their heads, even a few of those really big Yunnan water pipes for smoking tobacco. If you know, they look like huge bamboo bongs, but it's really just for smoking tobacco, and the water filters out some of the tar or whatnot in the tobacco. And so I did a little research on the train, and I know I want to get out to the Bangdong village. That's my first place I really want to go to. And having no car of my own, I was looking at public transport, public bus routes and stuff out to the east. And so I hail a cab and have it take me to the bus station. So I'm at the train station, get a cab, go to the bus station. I get out and I go into there and I'm like, okay, like I want to get a ticket to the Bangdong village. I think it's this bus route. And the clerk behind the desk says, sorry, this is not the right bus station. You have to go to the other bus station that's on the east side of town. And I'm like, okay, I just spent 15 minutes getting here. Now I'm going to spend 15 minutes going there. And I'm like, daylight's burning. It's already, 3:30. And I'm wondering, I don't want to get stuck out in rural Yunnan and Bangdong village without a ride back, right? And so I hail another cab, and I'm trying to get to the other bus station. Fortunately, there are a lot of taxi cabs idling outside this bus station, so I hail one, I get in, sit down, and there are beads on the seat, the bamboo beads. If you've never been into a taxi in China, let me give you a little introduction. And now in comes one of the rather surprising main characters of this tea soup episode. She's called Dujie. Her name is Dujie, and she is a taxi driver here in Linsong. And let me real quick tell you a little bit about taxis in China because they're a thing of magic in their own. The first time I took a taxi in China, I thought I was going to die. The second time, Yeah, I thought I was going to die. Almost all of the times in like my first year of driving in China, riding in China with taxi drivers, I think they're insane. I have no idea why they're speeding through intersections, crossing lanes and stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the wrong lane as an incoming bus is heading towards us and he's honking to get over. And I'm just like, yep, that was, at least I died in an exciting way. And, and it's just the name of the game. But what's really interesting about this is the taxi drivers kind of have their own code where people give them leniency. People give them the respect that they deserve because really after being in China for 7, 8 years, like I've only gotten in an accident in a taxi one time, and that was at a red light. Like the light turns green, the taxi goes, the guy in front of us went and stopped. Little fender bender, nothing serious. That was the only time I've had any issues with a taxi. I think everyone else is also kind of compliant with it, where when they see a taxi doing kind of stupid stuff, they're like, okay, I'll let this taxi get away with it. It's a taxi. You know, they're all kind of like this. And without getting a little too tangential here, it's the same way with the e-bikes. In China, a lot of people actually drive e-bikes. Fewer people drive cars. And so there are e-bike lanes. And one of the great things here are the Waimai drivers who deliver your food. They're all on e-bikes. They're all on motorcycles in the e-bike lanes, and they're getting away with murder. They're just driving through intersections. They're cutting people off. They're passing by at 50 kilometers an hour while you're just like, anyways, people see this and they don't get angry about it. I mean, some people do, but usually it's just, I get Waimai too. I also order food to my door. I'm responsible for this. And I feel like taxi drivers in the same way are in this kind of halo of protection where they can kind of get away with stuff. Another thing about taxi drivers is I love taking taxis in China because as an introvert turned extrovert, which in Chinese they just say wei I cheng yi, like I, an introvert I, becoming an E extrovert when you need to. I get a lot of my information from taxi drivers. I mean, this isn't Skyrim, this isn't D&D. If I go to a new city and I want to find rumors, I don't go to the tavern. I ask taxi drivers, I ask bus drivers, I ask the really extroverted people in the markets on the side of the road who just greet me, talk to me, ask me what I'm doing. I start asking them questions, and I've gotten so much luck from the right taxi cab driver. There's this thing in my mind of like the mystical cab driver. Every now and then I get one, and it's just like it's like a god in a disguise. It's like, okay, here's everything you need. Here are all the clues. Here are all the keys. Here's where I'm actually going to take you. And it takes a little longer, but and it's not even the right location, but it's the location I need to get to. This is precisely what happened with Dujie. And Jie just means sister. Du is her surname. Dujie. She took me not where I thought I was going to go, but right where I needed to go. And so I got into the cab, and Dujie asked me where I'm going, and I'm like, oh, I'm trying to get out to Bangdong. Take me to this bus station. She's like, why are you going to that bus station? I'm like, isn't that the one that takes me to Bangdong? She's like, nope. I'm like, oh, okay. Happy I told you where I was going and not just the address. And I'm like, well, where do I need to go to get to Bangdong? And she says, oh, you need to go to this other station, but I'm pretty sure they only have buses in the morning. And she's like, why do you even want to go out to Bangdong? Like, there's nothing out there. And I, start opening up a little more and tell her, I'm out here chasing tea. I'm looking for Pu'er tea. And she goes, tell you what, you want to find tea? You want to get out to the tea villages? I have a friend that was an old cab driver who I met through driving cabs. And she now sources all of her own tea. She just opened up a little tea house in like 2018, like she says a few years ago. And she's always going out to the mountains now. Why don't I take you to her shop? And she can probably take you out to the mountains tomorrow or the next day. It's kind of a little late. And for me, with that mystical cab driver in my mind, I'm like, yep, this is exactly what should happen. I'm like, here it is. Here's the knock knock on the doors of fate. And I'm like, all right, let's go. I've decided to take it, not only because of that sheer luck idea, but also this is the best lead I have so far, an introduction from a friend to a friend. And so Dujie takes me to the tea house, and we kind of have to wait around for her friend Lanjie to come. And so what's funny about this, I call them Dujie and Lanjie. As I mentioned, Jie just means sister, and so Lanjie, Lan is the surname, Jie is the sister, Lan means orchid, and so she's Sister Orchid. And so we get to her tea house, and we're waiting around because she's actually in the mountains and just coming back from the mountains. And so here I am with somebody I just met a few minutes ago, and we're just chilling, just hanging out, talking. Dujie is asking me all these questions about, like, why aren't you married? How old are you? What do you do here? And I'm just like, okay, thank you. And she's like, you really should get married. You're being too picky. You need to find a woman now and get married before you get too old. And I'm like, thank you, Dujie. This kind of thing, I get this all the time here in China, and it never really makes me mad. I never feel like pushed or too much. I'm actually kind of moved by it because this is a stranger who cares enough about me and my well-being to give me advice. Even though it's not the advice I need, it still comes from a really good place, like a human-to-human connection, right? And so we're waiting for Lanjie, talking about all sorts of things. Dujie has a lot of questions about the West and America and stuff like that. Lanjie finally gets back from the Bangdong Mountains. And when I find that out, it kind of dampens my spirit because I'm like, she's not just going to turn around and take me right back to the mountains today. So we'll probably have to wait until tomorrow. It's probably, like 4 o'clock, 4:20 or something like that. The Xigui Mountains, the Bangdong village. By the highway, Xigui is probably like an hour away, an hour and a half maybe. But one good thing about being so far west and the fact that China doesn't recognize time zones is that out here the sun sets really late, especially in summer. It's like Vancouver. The sun sets like 10 p.m. No, it's not that late, but the sun sets pretty late. We're looking like 7:30, like 8:30 or something like that. So Lanjie gets back, sees Dujie. She's kind of excited. They start talking, catching up. And it's really cool to see this and, eavesdrop on a conversation between two old friends. Dujie is just like totally proud of her friend to kind of like trade professions so late in life because these ladies are a little old, probably like 50s, early 50s or something like that. And so they're changing their professions. They're doing something new. Like Lanjie has a son that just graduated high school. And so I call them, Lanjie and Dujie, but the Chinese term would probably be a little more like ai, like auntie. Anyways, I really enjoy learning about people as they talk to other people. I like people watching, of course, and I can listen enough to the Chinese. Like the dialect here is not so strong, and so I can understand a lot of what's going on. And then I'm also kind of looking at Lanjie as, a potential sourcing partner for teas in the future. I've been sourcing teas for so many years now, working with so many people. I have a pretty well-tuned intuition when it comes to, is this person honest? Are we compatible? Are we going to be helpful to each other? Are we going to be good sourcing partners? And Lanjie really checks all the boxes there. The one thing she has working against her is she's not a tea farmer. She's not a tea maker. She's still one step removed from the whole process, which, One River Tea is all about being direct farmer to the cup and stuff like that, understanding the whole process. However, talking to Lanjie, I realized that she is actually in partnership with several different small households that are making tea and selling a lot of their tea to her, which she sells in the town, and then they split the profits. And so this is kind of like what I mentioned, the gold mine to find in the Kunming tea market of somebody who's selling direct tea from a specific mountain, from a specific region. Lanjie is that opportunity. She goes to these villages, to these farmers, these makers, and says, if you partner with me, I will sell your tea in the city of Linsong, in the tea market in Linsong, and then we can split the profits. And so she's kind of not necessarily one step removed from it, but still much closer to the farmers than a lot of other, third-party vendors. This really isn't so uncommon in China, and it's essentially what One River Tea is doing for the West. And so it's kind of cool to work with somebody kind of on that same level, like, oh, we're doing this same exact thing, except our markets are slightly different. And another thing that's cool about Lanjie is she started her company in 2018, and that's right when we started One River Tea. And so we've both been doing this about the same time because that's literally what we do is we go to the partner farms and then we directly sell their tea. And so Lanjie is doing exactly the same thing. And so I'm just, a bug on her back. Is that a term? A bug on her back? I'm just like a bird in her shadow. I don't know, what are these terms? Anyways, Lanjie agrees to take me out and introduce me to all of her partner farms. And she's like, you know what? I just came from the Bangdong village. I don't want to go back there right now, but I do need to go to the Lee brothers Atsai in Xigui. And since Xigui just built that new highway, we can get there in like an hour and a half. And so I'm like, all right, I guess we're doing this thing. Let's go. And so it's about 5 o'clock when we really set off. And I'm thinking in the car, I got into Linsong with zero connections, had that moment of panic. Like, what am I even doing? How am I ever going to find tea? 2 hours later, I'm on the road to a household farming production in Xigui, like the mother of all Pu'er tea in the region. Really, really remarkable how fast this can happen. I wrote about it where it just feels like sometimes you pass through the center of the Wheel of Fortune, that hub where all of the spokes kind of converge and there's suddenly a path and you just have to step right through it because these moments of perfection are so fleeting. And only because everything transpired, only because Dujia was right there waiting, all because I went to the wrong train station, bus station, whatever, like it's all led me here. And so I was lost in thought for a lot of that drive out to Xigui. And Lanjie, being an old cabbie, she has that great cabbie demeanor, doesn't talk too much, creates a conversation, will keep it going if you're interested. And I'm learning a lot about her and the region and kind of, her style of business, what she's doing, why she got into tea. And this is where I'm getting a lot of my information about Xigui. Of course, I did some research before getting here. I've had samples of Xigui tea, but a few things kind of escape me. Like Lanjie tells me how beautiful the name Xigui is, and I didn't realize it, but Xigui kind of has this sensation of, its meaning is poetic. It kind of means a return to old times, a return to the past. And it's kind of an homage to the old tea gardens that were out there. This area, the Manlushan, the core region, the Manlushan produced tribute tea in the Qing dynasty, and so this region has been very famous for a long time. Unlike a lot of the other regions that have been forgotten about, that are only being discovered now, this Xigui area has always been pretty famous. However, it wasn't always called Xigui. The Xigui is kind of a modern renaming, rebranding of it to kind of bring it back to its old glory. And so what we're doing is we're getting out to the Manlushan, the core region of the Xigui, which is really right on the banks of the Linsong River. You can literally see it from the slopes of the Manlushan. And so there's a lot to be said about the highway, how this makes it really, really easy to get out to Xigui, to do a little tea tourism. But there's also this fear that this will create a higher price for the Xigui tea. It'll create a lot more imposters, people pretending to make Xigui tea. One of the new regulations the county put in is a small little security guard check for people coming into the mountains. And so when we get up there, we pass through like a guard station, they kind of look in the car, not very seriously. But what they're doing is they're making sure we're not smuggling in tea. This kind of sounds weird if you don't understand what's going on here. A lot of times what people will do is they'll take tea from extra regional tea and bring it into the region. We talked about this in the fooding white teas. You'll see this a whole lot in Pu'er, where you take teas from outside of Laobanjiang, really cheap teas. You bring them into Laobanjiang, you process it there, and then you sell it as Laobanjiang tea. I remember this with like olive oil, where it says grown in Brazil, pressed and made in Italy. And so what they'll do is they'll just ship olives to Italy and press it there and then say it's Italian olive oil. Similar, they're trying to avoid this happening in Xigui. And so we're not allowed to bring any loose tea into the region for fear that we would process it there and sell it as if it was Xigui tea. Now, our first stop is the Manlushan, the core region. And what's really cool is there are planks everywhere, walkways everywhere, and you can kind of just walk through the mountain and see people picking the teas. Another interesting part about this year in 2023, spring of 2023, it was a very, very serious drought year in Yunnan. Like they didn't have any rain all year, and this is like April. And so a lot of the trees, a lot of the really old trees, were either really, really late to bud or they just didn't bud at all. This is kind of common where it's like if there's not enough water, the trees don't bud. If there's too much water, they bud and then the taste isn't so good. So it's kind of like grapes, where if you have a drought year, all the flavors get a little more concentrated, but the prices tend to go up because the yield is much less. And so getting there, this is kind of essentially late picking season. So I'm here on the 13th or the 14th of April, and things are pretty much over. There's still a little bit of picking and processing going on, but this is not the highest quality pick grade. What's cool though is just seeing the people in the trees as we're walking through. One thing I noticed about the Manglushan is that the trees are a little sparser. There's a lot of soil. It's not a dense forest. This mountain, essentially one side of the mountain, is really just the tea garden, where there are tea trees everywhere, but there's still plenty of space to walk between them. And they're not huge trees. They're maybe 3-4 meters tall. They're not these massive, massive trunks that you get down south in Xishuangbanna in the really deep jungles. These are old trees that are kind of withered in their own way. It's really interesting to see. Even the tea king. Usually every mountain will have a tea king, and this is an old tree. This one is, I think, they say 1,000 years old, but I never really quite believe these things. I think, as we mentioned, if it's a Qing Dynasty garden, that could be 300-400 years old. If it's the wild tea king that, gave birth to the whole mountain, maybe 1,000 years old, who knows? I don't really trust it, even if there's a sign and a gate that says it's 1,000 years old, but it was pretty large. It kind of looked like, not quite like an oak, but had quite a substantial canopy to it. But it wasn't mind-blowingly huge. I was able to see some of the auctioning off of these leaves and kind of hear about the prices that were being charged for this late pick Gushu tea from the core region. For the loose leaf tea, they were selling it for about 900 kwai for 500 grams, and that translates to about $130 per pound for the loose leaf. And this is loose leaf, fresh leaf tea that's just been picked. And so when you're making the Xigui especially, and you're making any tea, you'll lose water weight when it withers, you'll lose weight when it dries. And so to get 1 pound of finished tea, you usually need 5 pounds of this fresh leaf. And so if you really quickly do that math, you're buying the loose leaf tea for $130 for the pound. You need 5 times that to make 1 pound of finished tea. So just in leaf material, you're spending about $650 for 500 grams of finished Xigui Gushu tea. Now, if you press that into a 200-gram cake, just the leaf cost itself would be about $260 for the Gushu Pu'er tea. And if you add in, the maker's fee, the withering fee, the processing fee, and all that, the pressing fee, and then the markup, you're looking at something that's easily could sell for $800, $900, $1,000 just for that tea cake. And for me, these numbers certainly check out because I usually see the Gushu as about 4 times the price of the Qiaomu. And this year I pressed the Qiaomu, and that cake I'm selling for about $200 for 200 grams. And so the Gushu, I would say, is probably 3 or 4 times that, which, like I said, it probably would sell for $800 to $1,000, probably more if it's like that true Gushu. Anyways, just a really quick insight into kind of how to look at the prices. I feel like a lot of people, especially vendors and stuff like that, they're not so transparent about how much the tea actually costs. But sometimes when it's a tea that no one is selling, that is really difficult to sell. But then I see it on the market. I see it in the fakes and the knockoffs and like the Kunming tea market. I'm like, this is when it's really important to understand how much the fresh leaf actually costs from the core region. I remember even telling this to a Chinese person who also sells tea, and they're like, oh, well, I heard it was even more expensive for the fresh leaf. And I was like, well, that's the price I heard being auctioned off in the Manglushan mountain during spring tea season, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's probably accurate, but I don't know, it still feels like it's a little too cheap." Anyways, after touring the Manglushan area, Lanjie takes me to the partner farm, the two brothers Lee, who are actually her kind of connection up here, that she's buying their tea and selling it in town. And so we get there, and it's, very modest little production area. No one's driving Bentleys. No one's got a Lexus or a Rolls Royce. It's just like a simple pickup trucks and like village kind of farm area. And we drink some tea and we have some food. What's really great about this is like every time I visit the farmers and the makers, it's always like a really nice country dinner kind of thing. We're eating outside overlooking the mountains and the Linsong River. We're drinking Xigui Gushu, which is just fantastic. I'll cover a lot of like how to enjoy these teas in a later episode, but for Xigui in particular, they say it really likes a heavy pour, a lot of hot water. You pour it in quick, you pour it out quick, and it delivers a really nice huigan, really sharp fragrance. It's really a wonderful tea. This is really one of the highlights of the trip, just sitting with the tea makers and drinking tea, drinking the teas that they just made, eating food, and they're giving me the tour of their small little factory. They're showing me the storage room of all the Xigui, all the Huangpian Gushu from the previous years. There are cameras everywhere in their little storeroom. There's like padlocks on stuff. Like, this is a lot of money in a really small place because the Xigui just sells for so much. And it's really cool. Like, I'm talking to Asai, who's another one of these rather young makers. And so he's just been living up here, him and his brother Lee. They're both surnamed Lee. A lot of the people in this village actually have that Lee surname, very similar to when we went to the Wudong Mountain, and a lot of those people had the Wen surname. This is just another example of the Ziransun, the little production villages that were once in charge of this area, have been living in this area for a really long time. So that's, for me, just another thing to realize, like, okay, if I'm looking for somebody who makes the Xigui, if their name is Lee, there's a higher chance, higher probability that they're probably the actual source, right? And again, what's really fun about this, what I really enjoy is seeing how the people interact, seeing the relationship between Lanjie and the Atsai and the Lee brothers. It's a deep friendship, really comfortable, really casual. Not a lot of like, oh, I'm buying this from you, I'm making you do this, like, please let me do this. It's old friends kind of feeling. It's very good. So my intuition all feels good, and we actually get to see Atsai make a little bit of tea. One interesting thing that I noticed here is he's actually making it in an electric wok. It's huge, right? Very similar to like the wood-fired woks you see in the other regions making pu'er. It's like as big as a satellite dish, and you lean over it and toss the tea in it. I've never seen, though, an electric wok like this before. Atsai was saying that the customer commissioned this in particular because supposedly if you use an electric wok, the fragrances might not peak as much. It might not be as mouth heavy. How do I say that? The mouthfeel might not be as thick and as meaty as if you use like the wood-fired wok, but supposedly it preserves the fragrance in a better way, that you can press it and age it for a longer time. While the Lee brothers still make the wood-fired wok teas, this particular batch was made in the electric wok. And one really amazing thing here that I just still can't get over is like Atsai was making it, and then Lanjie was like, oh, can I have a try? And Lanjie has a try. And then Lanjie is like, oh, Danqing, that's my Chinese name. She's like, Danqing, do you want to try? And I get a chance to fry up some of this Xigui tea, this fresh Xigui tea. And let me tell you, it's not easy. There's a lot of pressure on me because the wok is so hot, and I can hear the leaves just sizzling on, and I'm just like trying not to burn anything because I could really mess this stuff up. So I'm getting a little terrified, a lot of pressure on me, moving everything around. It's getting really hot. And yeah, eventually Atsai takes over again, and I can actually relax for a little bit. But again, I'm just like struck by this feeling of luck where it's about 8 o'clock. I've been in Linsong for only 5 hours, and here I am in the core region on the mountain of Xigui making tea by hand in a wok. It's just really remarkable how this works. I won't get into the full production, but I got to see the entire production from their withering, their frying, their rolling, their drying, and all of that. Just that first day in Linsong, coming there without any sources at all. On the way back, Lanje is driving me back into Linsong, and she's like, hey, do you have a hotel booked? And I'm like, well, no, I didn't even have time to book a hotel for the evening. I'm still wearing the bag that I've been had on my back for the past like 2 weeks with all my stuff in it. My clothes are dirty, and I'm like, yeah, I definitely need a place to stay. And she's like, I actually have a few apartments available that I usually do long-term leases for, traveling people who are working. If you want, you can just stay there for free. And I'm like, am I pushing my luck here? Like, I haven't paid Lanje anything. I haven't bought any tea from Atsai or the Xigui village yet. And then she's like, oh, stay at my apartment for free. And I'm like, yeah, would it be rude to say no? And so I eventually stay in it, and yeah, it's something that she's still working on it, so it's not quite totally furnished. And so it was kind of a bare minimum apartment, but it was really cool to be like, okay, like I have a place to stay now. I'm making friends, I'm making these connections and stuff like that. And from the other side, this is definitely a social contract kind of thing, like a social connection where our relationship's deepening. And yeah, it's really cool to kind of build these connections where, I can confidently say right now that I can't wait to go back to Linsong and hang out with Lanje, hang out with Atsai, see all these people again in spring. And yeah, I really want to be able to bring other people into this world and introduce them to these farms as well. So that was a really crash course into my time in Linsong. It's amazing how much happened in just that. It wasn't even 24 hours. It was like 6 hours from when I arrived in Linsong. Really remarkable. Again, I mentioned earlier how it just sometimes feels like there's this moment of perfection where everything's possible and you just hit every note right, and you just feel very lucky about it. So thank you guys for listening to this episode of Tea Soup. Thank you for joining my journey through Linsong out to Xigui. In the next episode, I'll talk about the Bangdong village, which, was another incredible sourcing trip with Lanje just the next day. And so again, there's so much more to talk about for Pu'er, and so yeah, I'll have to break this up into a few different episodes. So thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed the stories. Spoiler alert, we did actually press some of that Xigui Qiaomu tea this spring. And so if you're curious about how it tastes, we have some samplers, we have whole cakes available on the One River Tea website. And so if you want to sample it, if you want to try out these flavors for yourself, just hop over to onerivertea.com. And yeah, we would always appreciate any support you guys want to give us. And until next time, this is Derek from One River Tea. Brew happy.